So, back in 2019, Oda had given an interview where he said that he wants to finish One Piece in 5 years. 5 years. Now, as a fan, this doesn't really make much sense, and I think most of you guys would agree with this, because we can just sit here and start listing a bunch of storylines that have to be resolved in those potentially 5 years that we just don't see how Oda can do them justice in that short period of time, right? For example, going through some real quick, we need a story surrounding Shanks. We need a story surrounding Blackbeard. We need a story surrounding Raftel and finding the One Piece. We need a story surrounding the post-One Piece war against the world government, right? We need a story surrounding the Revolutionary Army and then Elbaf, and those are just a few, and each of them individually might easily will take 1 year, and if Oda can start mixing some of them into individual arcs, but if he does that, then clearly those arcs should be longer than a year, so even if he starts mixing them into potentially 3 arcs, the ones I listed at least, that easily still takes up to 6 years, right? So the math just doesn't make sense. Also consider that the things that I listed doesn't include Wano as part of it, and Oda gave that statement of 5 years before Wano, so we have to account for Wano as well. So already we can see some of the issues, right? And on top of all that, these are just the minimum amount of stories that need to be completed before One Piece is done. This doesn't account for any, setup or build-up arcs or any side stories that Oda might still want to tell. And I might even be missing some important things that he set up that he still needs to, go through. So what is going through Oda's mind when he says that he wants to finish One Piece in 5 years? I'm going to argue that Oda, when he says he wants to finish it in 5 years, what he really means is that he wants to finish it in 5 arcs, right? So before we get into why I think that's the correct interpretation of Oda's words, let me explain what I mean by an arc real quick, right? So an arc can often mean an island-specific arc, so such as, Alabasta's island arc is one that starts when the Straw Hats arrive at Alabasta and end when they leave Alabasta. But the arc, or the definition of the word arc that I'm going to use, is a story arc, right? This is the beginning of a storyline that might span multiple islands, right? So for example, the Alabasta story arc actually starts all the way back in the Twin Capes and ended when we said goodbye to Vivi at the end of Alabasta, and every smaller arc within this larger story arc could potentially contribute to the bigger arc, but it doesn't have to. For example, Little Garden contributed to the bigger arc of Alabasta because it gave us more insight into Baroque works, while a smaller arc such as Drum Island didn't really contribute much to the bigger arc, but was more of a side story. Now that we have a definition of what I mean when I say arc, let me explain why I think when Oda says 5 years, he means 5 arcs, right? So, back in 2012, Oda gave another interview where he said that the original plan for One Piece was that it was going to be a show that was going to run 5 years total, right? And these 5 years would consist of the East Blue arc, which was 1 year, then 3 years of adventuring, and then a final saga for 1 year, or final arc of 1 year. Now, ignoring that 3 years of adventuring in the middle, which is kind of vague, we don't really know how many arcs is gonna make up that. You can see that the beginning and the final arcs are both equated to 1 year. So even from the very beginning, Oda had this weird thought in his mind that every arc will take him 1 year. Now, keeping that pattern going, in 2007, Oda said that he planned to kill Mary within 1 year of Chapter 303. For reference point, Chapter 302 was the end of Skypiea. So 303, I believe, was the beginning of the Davy Backfight arc, which was a very small, tiny arc, and then immediately led into the much bigger arc of the Water 7 and Enies Lobby arcs, right? Now, if you combine Enies Lobby and Water 7 into one major story arc, which it really is, that was one arc later, right? So Oda was correct. He did kill Mary one arc later, but he said 1 year, right? And again, for a reference point, that Enies Lobby / Water 7 arc ended up taking 3 years. So again, for some reason in Oda's mind, one arc seems to equate to 1 year. If this isn't convincing enough for you, let's look at my final piece of evidence where back in 2016, Oda said that year, again, year, would be the year of Sanji, right? Now, of course, we know retrospectively that the Year of Sanji was referring to the Whole Cake Island, where that entire arc was centered around Sanji. Yet that arc took 2 years, but it was one arc. Again, Oda, for some reason, keeps using the word year when he's clearly just referring to arcs. Maybe this is just some sort of optimistic hopefulness of Oda and thinking that he can finish his arcs in 1 year. Right? He wants to keep these arcs short, but he has also stated that oftentimes when he starts writing these arcs, they just become longer than he expects. So I guess before going into each arc, Oda has this hopefulness inside of him where he thinks, yes, this arc will take me 1 year. And I believe when he said he wants to finish One Piece in 5 years, that same thought pattern creeped in, and he was really trying to say that it'll take him five arcs, and each arc will take him a year, which we know it will not, just based on Oda's history. And of course, again, he said this back in 2019 before Wano, or the beginning of Wano, so I would have to assume that Wano was one of those 5 arcs. So in the rest of this video, I want to give you guys my outline for the rest of the story, and I'm just going to keep it very general, so I'll just mainly talk about the villains and the big picture topics that will be part of each of these arcs. And in doing so, I want to share with you guys my predictions for how Oda can complete the rest of the story in a relatively satisfying way, covering all the bases that we need to cover, and he can do this in just 4 arcs, right? Now, the first thing that I really want to emphasize is power scaling, right? The reason why is because most of my previous videos are talk about power scaling, and I kind of want to build off of that, right? Power scaling is a very important factor in a story, especially in a battle manga like One Piece, because it builds tension, right? And Oda respects this, and Oda uses it to build tension every single arc. If you go through the entirety of One Piece, pre-time skip and post-time skip, usually the villains get progressively stronger, and sometimes the leap is a lot, sometimes the leap is not that much, but it typically always gets stronger so that we as readers feel the tension when Luffy and the main characters fight these villains and their organizations, right? Now, the Yonkos pose a unique problem because they're supposed to be all the same level of strength. So it's kind of weird because Oda, if we're going one Yonko at a time, then it's hard for Oda to build tension in these future arcs because it's like, okay, we beat one Yonko. If Luffy, for example, beats Kaido one-on-one, when he fights any other Yonko, it's just like, is there any tension? Like, we already seen him beat a Yonko, and we know that these characters are just as strong as Kaido, so where is the tension, Oda, right? So how is Oda going to get around that? Well, I think the clear solution is to have multiple V1s against the Yonkos and then have them decrease as we go through these arcs to have that clear sense of progression and continuous tension. So I'm going to keep that in mind as we talk about the next 4 arcs and what I believe will be the general idea of those arcs. So before we get into the future arcs, let's do a quick recap of what I believe will happen in the Wano arc, right? So if you guys haven't seen my Wano prediction video series, there's 2 parts of it. I would recommend it. But in those videos, I talk about the fact that in Wano, I believe Kaido will lose and will lose his title as Yonko, potentially die, and Big Mom will get away and flee to Elbaf. And I also believe that in that arc, Garp, who will join that arc later on, will die in that arc, and Law will also die. So they'll be removed from the story going forward. And I think Wano will become a Straw Hat territory. And another thing that I did not mention is that I think Luffy will become the 4th Yonko, officially replacing Kaido. Now, the reason why I think this is because there was already build-up, since in Whole Cake at the end of it, Luffy was sort of, not officially, but in a hype way, referred to as the 5th Yonko by Big News Morgans. So if he's involved with another Yonko, and then he's able to actually defeat them, I think he is the best candidate, even though I don't think he'll be Yonko level at this point, but he will be the best candidate to replace Kaido and become one of the 4 Yonkos, especially because he'll be getting territories at this point, right? Now, in terms of fighting, I mentioned in my prediction video that Kaido will fight in a 5v1 against Luffy, Kid, Law, X-Drake, and Hawkins, right? And I think that 5v1 will start to get less and less as we go through each of these Yonko fights to maintain that tension. Next arc, right after Wano, will be the Elbaf arc, right? This will involve the Giants, and this is where Big Mom, after fleeing, will go to. With the half of her crew that she brought with her, will also follow Big Mom into the Elbaf territory. Another thing, I think the rest of the whole Big Mom Pirates will also convene in Elbaf, maybe because Blackbeard has attacked Whole Cake Island and they have to flee from Blackbeard, and then Blackbeard later goes to Wano to kill Kaido. But regardless of the reasoning, I do think that the entire Big Mom crew will be in Elbaf, and the story will be giant-centric, but also centered around defeating Big Mom, and we get to explore her relations with the giant. And I also think that this will be a Usopp-centric story as well, or at the very least, Usopp will play a big part because his personal story is strongly connected to Elbaf. Now, the main conflict will be between Luffy and his allies versus the Big Mom pirates, and I believe that Kid will continue on his alliance and follow Luffy to defeat Big Mom. Kid, who's already had set up, in with fighting against Big Mom, he's sunk some of her ships. He has infiltrated Whole Cake before, losing to Sweet Commander, but there's clearly ties with Big Mom and Kid, so I think he will continue on with Luffy to defeat Big Mom in Elbaf. And also, I think Rogue will be introduced to this arc. Rogue, a supernova who is not really tied to any other story, and he's the only supernova that we have remaining that isn't tied to a specific story. Every supernova already has been shown, or we know will in the future will be tied to a specific story, such as Bonnie with the whole world government, right? Some of you guys might be thinking, why would they not just go back to the Whole Cake Island to beat Big Mom? Well, I think the story of Whole Cake Island is done. It's never been a case where we kind of retreaded to a main territory or a main island after already having a full story in it. And also the fact that we've already gotten Big Mom's poneglyph as a rubbing shows that we don't really have a reason to go back to Whole Cake Island, because the main thing that we really needed there was the poneglyph. And now defeating Big Mom doesn't need to happen in Whole Cake Island. It can happen in Elbaf, especially because of all the connections with Big Mom and Elbaf, right? Now, as a result of this arc, what I think will happen is Big Mom will be defeated, but this time in a 3 versus 1, where Luffy, Kid, and Rogue will team up to defeat Big Mom, again, maintaining that tension and kind of giving us that feeling of progression as Luffy's becoming stronger through these fights. And at the end, Big Mom will fall, leaving another hole in the Yonko system, and I think this time Kid will fill that hole. And I believe Rogue will join Kid's crew, mainly because I feel like if Kid is going to become a Yonko, his crew needs to become more strong, and because of that, I think a powerhouse like Rogue should join his crew so that he can, stay relevant in the story, and while Kid is, growing in stature, and specifically Kid and his crew, right? And I also think Elbaf will join Luffy's territory, and I think somebody like Katakuri might also join Luffy's fleet. So those will be the results of the Elbaf arc. The next arc following the Elbaf arc will be what I'm going to call the Find One Piece arc, right? And I believe that this arc will center around the discovery of the One Piece and the island of Raftel, right? This seems a little early, I know, because if you're doing the math, there's still 2 more arcs left after this one. But I will get to why I think the One Piece will be found a little bit earlier than what most people would think in the story, right? Now, where is this going to take place? I think this could actually encompass multiple islands, such as Lodestar, the island Beehive, God Valley, and of course Raftel right at the end. And I think story-wise, it'll involve Blackbeard and his crew, and also Shanks will be finally introduced into this story, and a little bit of the world government, specifically the Gorosei, right? The main conflict will center around Luffy and his allies versus the Blackbeard pirates, and I don't think Shanks will play much role in beating Blackbeard, because I think that's a little overkill to have Shanks and Luffy go up against Blackbeard. But I think he will play Shanks and his crew will play a story relevance, while it will be Luffy's job to take down Blackbeard. And it'll also involve the last road poneglyph that is, we don't know where the location of that is. And I think a lot of other things will start to get tied together in this arc. I think the ancient civilization, we're going to learn more about that. I think the weapons, we're going to learn more about that. And I think the whole arc will culminate with a huge clash between Luffy and his pirate crew and the Blackbeard pirate crew. And at this point, Luffy will almost be Yonko level, right? He's just beaten Big Mom in a 3v1. So now he's starting to get there, but he's not exactly there yet. And I think he will either fight Blackbeard in a pure 1v1, in which Luffy will come out through sheer willpower, and he'll be able to make up for that difference in power through just his personality. and his drive. But I think an interesting alternative could be, because I feel like the world government will start getting involved in this because of just how endgame this is and how close these pirate crews are to finding the One Piece, which the world government does not want to happen. I think what we could see is Luffy teaming up with Smoker or Kobe, one of those two, to fight against Blackbeard. And this is because of the parallels between Luffy and Roger. Roger teamed up with his main marine rival in Garp to take down Rocks, and Blackbeard is clearly Rock's successor of some sort, or he's carrying on Rock's will. So therefore, it'd be cool to have Luffy team up with his marine rival in either Smoker or Kobe. Personally, I think it's Smoker, but that's a whole different discussion. And will defeat Blackbeard. I could see either 1v1s for Luffy and Blackbeard or this other scenario. And this will culminate in the defeat of the Blackbeard pirates and the conclusion of their story, as the Raftel is now there for the taking, with Luffy's main rival out of the way. And I think the entire arc will end with the discovery of the One Piece, or the very least, the discovery of Raftel. And I believe Shanks and Luffy will do this together. Next, the arc after this will be the post-One Piece Ultimate War arc, right? Now, this has been pretty much confirmed by the words of Whitebeard, who said that after the One Piece is found, there will be a huge war that will encompass the entire world, right? And this war will involve the Luffy and Shanks and all of their allies against the world government, right? And I think pretty much every character in the entire verse will be involved. The Kid Pirates, who are Yonko at this point, other supernovas, other allies we've made along the way. Everybody will get involved, and even potentially ex-Yonkos. I think if Kaido and Big Mom, if they survive, they could also be involved in this war in one way or another. I also think the Revolutionary Army will get involved, and they will, be fighting against the Gorosei and the Tenryubito. And I think if God Valley is not something that was explored in the previous arc, I think this is the arc that God Valley gets fleshed out more, and of course Mary Joie will be a very central location for this entire arc. The main conflict will be, of course, between the Straw Hats and the Marines, right? And this is where Luffy will take on Akainu in that classic final 1v1 ultimate villain fight. It'll be completely, character driven and whatnot, and I think Akainu at this point will be Yonko level. I don't think he's Yonko level yet. He is getting there, but by this point he will be, and I think Luffy, after beating Blackbeard in a 1v1 or a 2v1, will also be a Yonko level character, and you'll see a full-fledged final fight between two Yonko level characters. And of course, other obvious matchups that a lot of people have predicted are things like Zoro versus Fujitora, Sanji versus Kizaru, and then potentially Jinbei versus Green Bull, right? The ancient weapons will be involved. I think this will resolve the conflict between the world government and the ancient civilization. We'll find out all the history and whatnot, and it'll end with the fall of the world government. And I don't think they're going to completely disappear. I think a remodeled version will be created, led by the good Marines, such as, Kobe and whatnot. And I think Kobe will be very involved in this arc as well. And I think at the end of all this, the Red Line will also fall, creating the All Blue and, destroying Fishman Island and completing that prophecy as well. Now, the world government has been defeated. Luffy is free to finally, use the One Piece and become the Pirate King. However, I do still think there is one more arc left, and the reason why I think this is because, personally speaking, after watching One Piece and being a fan of this show for over a decade, I feel like it's just really strange for a show like One Piece to end on a war, right? Think about it. Is One Piece really about, the warfare and the fights and the combat? I don't think it is, right? It's a show that is very unique to all the other shonens out there because it focuses so much on just the enjoyment of, adventure and fun and, and pursuing your dreams and personal treasure and these really great uplifting concepts. War is not an uplifting concept, right? And I feel like it's kind of not like Oda to end the story in this way. I feel like he wants to end it in an enjoyable, fun way that completely sets it apart from other shows. So I think that because of that, I think there has to be another arc after the final war. And what I think this arc will be, and hear me out, it is gonna be a Davy backfight against Shanks and the red-haired crew. Now, before we dissect why I think that is, I do want to mention that it's clear that the One Piece, when it's found, that's not the end of its story. There needs to be something that happens after finding the One Piece that involves doing something with it to, I guess, fulfill its purpose or see through its message or something like that, right? Because when Goldie Roger found it, he said that he came too early, right? This is not the right time for the One Piece to be found, meaning that once it's found, there needs to be something that happens with it, right? And while the Blackbeard arc ends with the discovery of it, and the post One Piece war arc, the Ultimate War arc, deals with the protection of the One Piece against the world government. This is the arc where Luffy will prove to Shanks that he is deserving of seeing the One Piece through to its end and to fulfill its purpose. And this has a lot of relevance to the personal stories of the Straw Hats and the themes of treasure, freedom, and piracy. I think that the last arc needs to involve every character as much characters as possible. That we also need another arc that is Straw Hat centric, right? I think Oda wants to end on a personal note, just giving the Straw Hats time to shine. And I think an arc like this sets up all of that, right? Now, why a Davy back fight? Well, I think the Davy back fight has always been something that just didn't sit right with me when I first watched it. It was fun, but it seemed pointless. Like it was very unlike Oda. Oda always, puts things into his stories that is going to play a huge part in the main storyline, at least somewhere down the line, right? He doesn't just drop things just because he wants to, right? And if there are things that he just wants to drop, he usually sets them out because he wants to finish One Piece as fast as possible. So why is the Davy back fight even a thing? Like, what was the purpose of that? That needs to come back in some way. Now, one thing is that the Davy back fight was the most piratey that the show ever got, right? And I think it makes sense for this Pirates game to be played at the end of a show about pirates, and it kind of brings the tone back down to one that we've grown to love and appreciate about One Piece, and that's just fun and enjoyment. This final arc won't be this high stakes, war and just death everywhere. It won't be like that because that's not what One Piece is. It's gonna be an arc about fun pirates, just fulfilling the personal stories of these characters. Luffy will go up against Shanks. That's something that has been set up since episode 1. Will prove to him that he has finally made a crew that has surpassed Shanks' crew, return the Straw Hat, and of course, another great way to tie everything together is that Mihawk, who has always had a connection with Shanks, will, I think, join Shanks' crew by this point in the story because Mihawk is no longer a warlord and he just needs some sort of protection because he doesn't really have a crew. And it makes sense because Shanks seems to be a friend of his, so they have a lot of history. So Mihawk joining Shanks' crew, and then at the end, this gives Zoro the chance to complete his story by fighting against Mihawk. Even Usopp could get his storyline ended by going up against his father and completing his personal story about how that was a part of his past. The fact that his father had disappeared from his life and things like that. It's just such a clean way to not just story-wise end the show, but thematically end the show, as it ends with Luffy and his crew emerging victorious against Shanks, who at this point is stronger than a Yonko. So again, the tension is maintained, and he has completed what he set out to be. He is the Pirate King, and he can now see the One Piece through to its final purpose, whatever that ends up being. And that's it. That's the end of the show. And I feel like this perfectly respects and ends in a way that Oda would love for his story to end.